Yo, what's going on YouTube? Welcome to another patch notes review. Quick disclaimer, if I sound a little nasally, it is because pollen is absolutely kicking my butt, but I can't be closing my window because my cats love it and they also like knocking down my jersey, but it is what it is. We move. This patch is a little bit interesting. This is patch 10.5 bonus update.
Still waiting on the bonus video,
but with a little bit of a preview to patch 10.6. If you are unfamiliar with the way that year 10 has basically been working in Smite, seasons within seasons, I guess. Year 10 is the whole like season of Smite, but then Season of Hope, which is patch 10.3, was the second season. The initial patch of season 10 or year 10 was the first season. All you need to know is we're getting like 3 massive updates throughout the year, and in about a month or so we're going to be getting the third one of those. Not even a month, I think like 2 or 3 weeks. This patch, I'm gonna go through it a little bit, and at the end I'm mostly gonna focus on what they're kind of teasing for the next season update on patch 10.6. Actually, you know what, why don't we talk about the teaser, I guess, for patch 10.6 at the start, because there's also some things here with the damage mitigation cap. So first things first, year 10's multi-season structure brings sweeping change, blah, blah, basically what I just told you. Because so much changes on the horizon, it might feel like a few things are missing from this bonus update. 10.6 will include sweeping item changes to decrease the stat values game-wide, with heavier decreases on power, therefore buffing tanks. There will also be many other new gameplay features and balance changes in that update. For 10.5 bonus, we aim to nerf the top SPL metagods in meaningful ways in order to encourage some shifts in the upcoming playoffs. Okay, so first things first, SPL wise, there is a playoff event that will essentially seed the real tournament, which is Masters. If you haven't been watching the regular phase, the kind of like group stage thing. The group stage was essentially meaningless unless you were first in your group. If you were first in your group, then you bypass this playoff tournament. Otherwise, everybody else is in the playoff tournament. So there are 6 of the 8 SPL teams competing in a playoff tournament. Your seeding going into that tournament 1 through 6, or I guess really it's rather than 1 through 6, it would be 3 through 8 technically, will be decided by this tournament. And then we get into Masters, which is like a 2-week event, includes STC, amateur teams, all that type of good stuff. Will be a lot more fun. We're playing on 2 separate patches, so the playoff event will be played on 10.5 bonus, and I believe Masters will be played on 10.6. So we're gonna have 2 different patches here upcoming for the tournament in the middle of the year, which is pretty exciting. A lot of crazy changes. What I really want to key on here, sweeping item changes to decrease stat values game-wide with heavier decreases on power. I know a little bit, but to me, or I know a little bit about like them saying they're buffing tanks, all that type of stuff. To me, the extremity of how they're doing this will be very interesting, because in my opinion, so far in year 10, I'd say Fire Giant, very easy to kill. Phoenixes without enhanced Fire Giant, very hard to kill. And then the Titan seems very easy to kill. So you have like this weird mid to late game trend where like you can get fire very easily, but it's hard to get a Phoenix. But if you do get the Phoenix, you can end the game very easily. So it's kind of encouraged this pace of the game where all you have to do is not get wiped at Fire Giant and instantly lose a Phoenix. If you just give up a Fire Giant and then defend your Phoenix, you have a much better chance at coming back. So it's kind of this weird push and pull thing. In my opinion, a lot of that is due to the potency of Hunters and Mages. Hunters being so strong in the early to mid to late game, just all stages, not so much early, but definitely mid to late game. Them being so strong makes it, you can just do Fire Giant at like 14 minutes, like straight up. Pretty much as soon as your ADC has like 3 items, or you get like a Frenzy, a Brace, or anything like that, that thing's dead, it's gone. And they just do so much damage right now, and Mages, same thing. The actual Phoenix, I guess corridor, whatever you want to call it, is so small that some Mages like Merlin or Baba or whatever, they can just cover the whole lane in AoE abilities that basically one-shot people. So because of that, I feel like it is very difficult to snowball off being tanky. I think a lot of solo laners specifically feel like their laning phase is rather unimpactful because they don't really have much to do, this, that, and the other thing. An item stat squish, essentially, other games have done this. I don't know how common it is in MOBAs, but generally when you have a stat squish like this, it will lower the pace of the game. It'll slow down the pace of the game. I think it'll be very interesting to see what they do with this, because when they say buffing tanks, a slower pace to the game doesn't necessarily buff them. It really depends how they do it. In the late game, you probably should still be able to die quite easily as a tank, but it takes longer to get to late game, if that makes sense. Really, the biggest thing, in my opinion, is that there's so much gold in the game that it really depends on the objective gameplay and how this looks. Everything's going to change. Everything I'm about to tell you, everything we're looking at, it's going to change entirely. I can't even really predict. I'm just going purely off conjecture here, but you really can't even predict what's going to happen depending on how they're doing it. But when they say things like sweeping item changes, I mean, Season of Hope, they literally changed every single healer, every single item that had lifesteal, healing, anything like that. They changed everything. I've never seen a patch like that in my life, and it feels like we're getting one that's just as big, if not bigger, in the next season. So I'm really excited for it. I'm not going to pretend to tell you guys like I could tell you how the game's going to change. It's going to be nuts though. Moving on to the here and the now, damage mitigation cap and stacking rule changes. Essentially, you can read all of this if you'd like. All it really means is that damage mitigation will function in the same way that other mechanics do in Smite, where there is kind of this additive feature between items and abilities. So for example, you might know that there is a protection cap in Smite. The protection cap is 325, but there are ways to go over it. For example, if you are Achilles and you use your 2, which gives you increased percentage increase on your protections, you will go over the cap. There are some other instances of this. I believe like Mulanok can go over cap. There's a bunch of stuff like that. This is a big change because when they introduce the damage mitigation cap, I think it does make sense to have that stat capped, but the value at which they capped it was very, very low. 25%, for example. If you build Lonos and Prophetic Cloak and you get the full value of both of those, you were already at 30% and they lowered it to 25%. So you kind of inherently saw a nerf to supports in that regard. You also saw a nerf to what, in my opinion, is the best defense item in the game, which is Spirit Robe, obviously conditionally because you have to get value off the proc, all that stuff. But it really was a big nerf to other characters. For example, Amma, when you're 2ing, you gain 15% damage mitigation. If you already have damage mitigation via items, you're basically just having your ability nerfed. You're worse off than, you know, a character who has damage reduction. Damage reduction, damage mitigation are two separate things. So, for example, Shell gives you damage mitigation, which would inherently go against this cap, and an effective Shell would basically be wasted from the mitigation cap, whereas something like Horrific is damage reduction, so it doesn't care about any of this, and you actually get the full potency of it. Having this kind of additive thing is a lot nicer. Easy examples, Baron Alt and ESET Alt, they give you damage mitigation. You'll be able to have your 25% from items and the effect of your ultimate, and you will be very tanky while using those abilities, whereas with the cap, that wasn't really the case. So good to see all this. I think a cap introduction makes sense. I think the additive function, like it works with every other mechanic in the game, is very good, and I'm excited to see how that feels. Moving on to the item nerfs, been a lot of talk of support aura items lately. We are seeing one nerf specifically to the healer aura item. Lotus Sickle nerf decreased the procs from 15 to 10 on both types on the aura. Really significant change, but does not kill the item. Still a very, very cheap item. The stats on it are still quite nice. A lot of health, movement speed, and cooldown is always good, and you still are getting a quick, early, cheap aura, so it'll still be a very good item, but I definitely like this change. Couple of ADC starter changes, Leather Cow losing 3 power and Dust Hole gaining a little bit of sustain. Kind of a 50% buff if you think about it, right? You're just adding an extra, 0.1% when it was only at 0.2. So I don't have a full grasp of why ADCs choose what they do. I would imagine you'll see a lot of Dust Hole. I feel like all the late game starter items for hunters are actually fairly comparable in terms of what they bring. But if you have an item like Dust Hole that just outtrades people in lane, you're likely to see people go that, because I believe Dust Hole is still 18 power. So Cal is now less power and less sustain, which should just mean that the Dust Hole hunter, if you're against a Cal hunter, would just, win that kind of one-on-one in that pressure. God Balance Sternanos decreased glaive damage on his passive and decreased the polymorph duration on his ult. The polymorph duration nerf specifically, I think, was very good. There was an update in the middle of last season in season 9 to kind of change the effect of a polymorph, and it was no longer affected by diminishing returns. That change made Wild Hunt incredibly potent. Polymorphs are just one of, if not the best CCs in the game. Having a hunter who has as good of a AoE crowd control as that, in my opinion, was a little bit much. Cern's had a lot of small nerfs over time. I think a lot of hunters are finally able to compete with him a good bit, so I really like to see this nerf on top of things like buffing Hachiman and other characters in the past patch of 10.5. I don't know why I couldn't speak there for a second, but you get what I mean. ADC meta changing is encouraged to me. I feel like it's been pretty stale for a while, so I'm all for this. Guan Yu basically getting a revert in the Season of Hope patch. He got the ability to go from 3 to 4 stacks on his Talu Assault, I believe, which took it from 45 maximum prot shred to 60. Stealing 60 prots of each type from an enemy is insane. Going back down to 45 is still a ton. I don't think this will kill the character, but I do think it'll reduce his ability to just one-shot people when he's going on them. Like, if you're against Iguana as a backliner and he full channeled his ult and his 3 on you and you didn't have Aegis, you were just dead. So glad to see him get nerfed. Hell, same thing, glad to see her get nerfed. A little bit less prot shred. You're mostly going to notice this in the mid to late game because you don't normally upgrade your 2 right away on Hell, but it should still be a pretty significant nerf. Hercules, same thing. I like that he's being nerfed. I don't like the way he's been nerfed, though, by the way. I feel like his damage is just too high. I think that's what really makes him oppressive in solo lane, is that he just does a ton of damage. Kind of wish that was lowered a little bit, but hey, we'll take it. And then Marty, small cooldown nerf and a small scaling nerf. Not really a small scaling nerf. It's 24% if you hit all 12 ticks. Maybe you hit around, 16% of that, 2/3 of the ticks, maybe a little bit more on average. A decent nerf, not that crazy. And then Nox, decrease the damage debuff on this effect from 40 to 30%. This nerf is really nice to me because Nox, if you had Horrific plus your ult is on such a low cooldown, and the combination of those abilities would reduce your damage by so much. She was just really frustrating. I think she could maybe use with a little bit more nerfing, but it's really hard to tell. There's a lot of very good supports in the game, in my opinion. Nox just happens to be one of the more annoying ones. And then I believe Serket has actually gotten the biggest nerfs in this patch. First one I want to talk about is something I'm very happy to see, which is the passive crit not apply at level 5. This is something, if you guys remember, when I first saw this change, I knew instantly everybody was going to complain about it. Nobody likes to get RNG crit at level 5. At that stage of the game, it'll basically one-shot you if you get lucky as Serket and crit people. That type of RNG in the game, nobody likes playing against it. It's extremely frustrating. I'm glad that it has been toned down. 5% at level 9 when she can get her second point in her ult. It's not as bad in my opinion. Yes, you can still get lucky, but 5%, it shouldn't happen all that much. And I think this change in general still helps Serket be a crit assassin, which I think is a really cool identity for her. Then going along the same lines, both of these changes I really like because it stops the ability for Serket to do a ton of damage while having a tanky build. You'll see people go a lot of items like Stone of Binding, for example, on her, giving her a little bit less in-kit percent shred and a slightly shorter CC chain. I think will be really nice. And last but not least, Vamana. I'm not gonna lie, I don't know how much they have to nerf this character for him to not be OP, but I was talking about this on stream the other day. Vamana for years and years and years was unplayable at a high level because of Ankh, right? Like, he would just get sundered by Ankh, he wouldn't heal in his ult, he would just get one shot by anybody who touched him. He was basically horrible in the late game. For years, people had kind of just said, hey, if you just make his ult not get owned by Ankh, he'll be really good. But rather than going that direction, he was buffed over and over and over from, I want to say, like season 5 or season 6 up until this year when they finally removed that effect. To me, it's kind of a weird game of like, how many buffs in the past were just completely unneeded if they just made it so that he wasn't affected by Ankh, and we're like slowly rolling those back. I'm honestly skeptical if even this is enough to roll that back all the way and have him not be turbo broken. These nerfs are significant, okay? 5% less conversion from physical protections towards his attack speed, his power, and the power gain from his ultimate. If you were to do the math on this, I believe the average Vamana build before being affected by auras is about 250 at level 20. If you have 250 procs and you do the math on this, he goes to about like, I believe he gets like all his in-kit buffs and stuff, like if you include like Phalanx in his build and all this other, small interactions. On average, he's gonna lose about like 12 to 15% attack speed and about, including his ult, like 20, 25 power, something like that. So we'll say at most he's losing 25 power and 15% attack speed. That is pretty significant, but I feel like one of the biggest things about Vamana is that his ult can last for such a long time that he's just one of those characters that puts you in a spot of either you have resources to deal with him or you don't. Like, For example, if you are a carry player and your escape is down and your Aegis is down, if a Vamana gets on you, you're probably just dead. It's kind of like a Camazotz or a Daji or something, right? Like, if a character goes on you and they can go out of combat, or they just have this ability that you can't really interact with, things like Yemoja ult, if you don't have the necessary relics, alts, all that stuff to deal with it, you're probably just dead a lot of the time. I still see Vamana ult in that way. I'd also like to mention that these nerfs, if you were playing Vamana in the jungle, which I do think is just perfectly fine, and he's a good character in the jungle, really all he lost is 10 power, because you're not building a ton of physical protections on that character anyways. I guess you could argue like the Eye of the Jungle upgrade, when you go to Protector, you lose a good bit, and that's fair, but if you're building full damage, you'll still be able to kill people as Vamana jungle. I think the character is just incredibly good. My preferred nerf forever, because I'm a support player and I like interactions with being able to wall people off, I would just make it so he can't walk through walls. I don't understand why it was changed back in the day. To me, it just doesn't really make sense. I feel like it's fairly unintuitive. Like, a character like Osiris, him walking through walls kind of makes sense because he's in this like spirit form. You have this visual indication of, oh yeah, he can walk through walls. He's like a ghost or whatever. Vamana's just a big fucking baby. Like, I don't understand why being a big ass baby means that you can walk through a Yemoja ult or a Ymir wall or whatever else. Maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm support biased. That's how I feel. But anyways, guys, that's pretty much the whole patch. Like I said, it's really hard to predict anything here. This is mostly just a very, very small tweak going into playoffs for the SPL. I'm not too caught up on this patch because we're going to be playing the actual Masters playoff event on the new season. And from the teaser they gave here, the new season is going to be crazy. So I'm excited for that. I'll see you guys on that update. That'll be a much, much longer patch review, and we'll really deep dive into stuff. I will also have guides that I'm planning on working on there. I know, guys, I've been super off. It's been hard for me to balance my schedule and a bunch of stuff going on, so I am sorry I haven't gotten as many guides out as I'd like to. I do try to talk about this stuff on Twitch as much as I can, so if you are interested in that content, please follow me there. But as soon as I see the changes for 10.6, I promise I will be working on some item guides and updating all that stuff. To be honest with you, the only reason I'm not going to do the item guide literally today as I'm recording this is because they say sweeping item changes to decrease stat values game wide. So, you know, fuck me, I guess. Unlucky. But whatever, guys, I'll see you next time. Hopefully everybody is having a great day, weekend, whenever this releases and you watch it, you know, having the best of times, and I'll see you on patch 10.6. Bye.
One if I'm trolling from Professor BM. You can hear the audience. I wonder if there's a favorite.